Bill Maher really broke the smug meter here with his take on Afghanistan. This is a new take that I've seen in a number of places where people are doing mental gymnastics trying to connect wokeness to the war in Afghanistan and the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Take a look.
And finally, new rule, blind hatred of America is just as blinkered as blind love. And we Americans should really get some perspective about where we live. Watching the shit go down in Afghanistan, I was reminded lately of every conversation I've ever had with an immigrant, almost all of which, if we got to really talking, included the notion, oh, you people have no idea. All you do is bitch about and badmouth your own country, but if you knew about the country I came from, you'd stop shitting on your own. But that doesn't make us the bad guys. We're not the bad guys. Oppression is what we were trying to stop in Afghanistan. We failed, but any immigrant will tell you we've largely succeeded here, and yet the overriding thrust of current woke ideology is that America is rotten to the core, irredeemably racist from the moment it was founded, and so oppressive, sexist, and homophobic, we can't find a host for the Oscars or Jeopardy! Oh, yeah. I'm sure you heard the new Jeopardy guy is out because he said boobies in 2014. And this is where your new Afghani roommates that you took in will prove so valuable because they'll turn to you and say, have you people lost your fucking minds? Have you? Have you ever heard of honor killings, public beheadings, throwing gay men off of roofs, arranged marriages to minors, state-sanctioned wife-beating, female genital mutilation, marriage by capture? Because we have. What's the lesson of Afghanistan? Maybe it's that everyone from the giant dorm room bitch session that is the internet should take a good look at what real oppression looks like. Ask your maid. Ask your Uber driver. Ask the Asian woman giving you a massage. She'll tell you this place is Shangri-La, and not just because she works in a place called Shangri-La.
I mean, listen, if you're talking about the war in Afghanistan and you have nothing to say about neoconservatism and endless war and imperialism, you probably shouldn't be talking about Afghanistan because you have no idea what you're talking about. Imagine bringing up this war. And by the way, he gave a much longer thing there. You can watch the entire thing. At no point does he bring up opium. At no point does he bring up the trillions of dollars of mineral wealth in Afghanistan. At no point does he bring up the military-industrial complex. At no point does he bring up Russia and China and this geopolitical chessboard which we're on, and we think they're our top enemies, and so we need to make moves to keep them at bay. At no point does he bring up any of the relevant issues. It goes back to wokeness bad. Listen, guys, I mean, I don't know how many times we could talk about this on this show. Anybody who knows this show and follows this show knows I'm a critic. I'm a critic of wokeness. But that doesn't mean that every issue is about wokeness. And so Bill Maher said this. There's that guy, Christopher Rufo, who was a right-leaning guy who was able to blow the whistle on Raytheon going, like, super woke and, you know, they had a manual that had all this goofy stuff in there. Yeah, I agree. All that stuff is ridiculous. But stop trying to connect every single issue back to wokeness. There's so many people out there who are just these massive one-trick ponies, and they're conservative, and everything comes back to wokeness and cancel culture and the social justice warriors. And now there's also this strain of liberal where every single issue comes back to wokeness bad. I mean, the number of more important things that went on in Afghanistan and terrible things that happened because of Afghanistan, the Afghanistan papers proved that we were lying every single step of the way in the war. They said we're going to get bin Laden and we got to get al-Qaeda. Well, that was all accomplished by 2011, but we stayed there and allied with warlords with child sex slaves. And according to a lot of people in the military, they were like, we have no idea what we're doing here. This makes absolutely no sense. And Bill Maher doesn't have anything to say about that. He says, you know, the lesson of Afghanistan is that we don't have it so bad here. By the way, the U.S. is largely responsible for a lot of these problems in Afghanistan. I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of the problems, of course, we're responsible for. We just waged a 20-year offensive campaign and occupied the country, and over 100,000 people are dead, probably way more, spent at least $2 trillion and destroyed everything in sight, propped up a fake government that collapsed in 2 seconds, and Gandhi, the president, ran out the back door with over $150 million. How can you talk about this and bring up wokeness? So let's go through some of the stuff he says there. He says, blind hatred of America is just as blinkered as blind love. Except something that Bill Maher used to understand that he doesn't really seem to get anymore is that it's not about hating America. It's about how do you improve a country. You improve a country by critiquing it, by saying, hey, here are the flaws, and here's what we need to do to make it better. That, I would argue, is love. That's more so love than just letting us make all these colossal mistakes and errors and do these terrible things and say, I'm going to defend it no matter what. If you catch your kid doing crystal meth and joining a biker gang or some shit, are you going to say, well, hey, I love him, so I'm not going to say shit? No, you're going to try to get him off the crystal meth and say, let's, don't become part of the biker gang. Let's try to find a productive hobby or something, or a group of friends that's not going to lead to you being in jail. That is love. And then he said, this part really triggered me. He said, oppression is what we're trying to stop in Afghanistan. See, the thing is, I know Bill Maher is smart enough to know that's not true, because he was one of the staunchest critics of the war in Iraq. And he would tell you it had a lot to do with the oil and it had a lot to do with the profits for the defense contractors. He would say that. But now when it comes to Afghanistan, what, you really think we're doing a humanitarian mission trying to stop oppression there? Bill, one of our top allies is Saudi Arabia. They have Sharia implemented. He does a list of things like, oh, have you heard of honor killings, public beheadings, female genital mutilation? He goes through this whole list of terrible things. And he acts like we were in Afghanistan to stop these things. Saudi Arabia does these things. And we give them money. And we give them weapons. Now, obviously, it's wonderful that we don't have honor killings and public beheadings in the United States of America, but what a low bar. He's like, well, we don't do that. Bill, why are you making terrible arguments on purpose? Why are you doing that? And, you know, the comparison of, like, various kinds of oppression as if to say, well, we've gotten to a good enough point, so just shut up and drop it. That's just a terrible point. What about illegal NSA spying that tracks everybody in the country? That's a form of oppression. What about the authoritarian war on drugs, where you lock up people who are nonviolent criminals who committed crimes that shouldn't even be considered crimes? So you lock up more people than everybody else in the world, and you don't think that's authoritarian? You don't think that's a form of oppression? What about the death penalty, which is disproportionately given to people of color? Even if a black person and a white person commit the same crime, the black person is much more likely to get the death penalty. Mandatory minimums, which again are applied in a racist way. Kind of a black person and a white person commit the same crimes, and the black person is much more likely to get the death penalty, or much more likely, to get the a stronger, harsher sentence, because that's the whole point of mandatory minimums. So how do you look at that and not consider that oppression? I don't understand. Isn't it oppression when we have medical bankruptcies as one of the top causes of bankruptcy in this country? Isn't that oppression? I think that's a form of oppression. I think student debt is a form of oppression. Now, I'm not saying it's as bad as honor killings or whatever. Of course not. But all this stuff should be talked about and discussed, and we should attempt to improve it. But no, if you bring it up, Bill Maher just brushes it aside and calls it woke. Like, oh, you're being woke by saying America has problems and we should fix them. That's not woke. And by the way, so he's now doing the old school right-wing trick on wokeness, where what you do is, if somebody on the left says something that's true, has a criticism that's true, you just brush it aside and say, well, you're just being politically correct. No, I'm not being politically correct. I'm being factually correct. And also, this whole mindset and this charge allows people on the right to get away with saying things that are factually not true because they could say something false, and then when you disagree with it, they go, oh, you're just doing cancel culture. You're just being politically correct, and you can't handle that I'm politically incorrect. And you're just being overly woke and sensitive. So you could say that for anything. I mean, I remember people said that. Remember when Trump said we need to take out their families, talking about the families of terrorists? When people on the left criticized that, there were people on the right going, you're just politically correct. It's politically correct just to be anti-war crime? That's about political correctness? That's about me being overly sensitive? No, war crimes are bad. War crimes are really bad. It's not woke to say that. It's not cancel culture to point it out. So, I mean, but this is where we are now with the discourse. Jeez, he's fallen so far. I mean, somebody made this point to me. Bill Maher was probably literally the only person who went from a supporter of Bernie in the 2016 primary. He went from Bernie to Klobuchar in the last Democratic primary. Imagine being a Bernie to Klobuchar voter, how bad your brainworms must be. And it has to be, listen, Trump probably just broke his brain. Trump broke his brain. But now we have a Democratic president actually pulling out of the war in Afghanistan, and old school Bill Maher would have been defending him vociferously. But now what do we get? He does a goofy new rules segment where he acts like it's tied to wokeness, and wokeness is bad because we pulled out of Afghanistan, because compare how bad Afghanistan is to what people complain about here. For the love of God, not everything is about goofy college campuses and people with purple hair and people talking about racism and sexism and homophobia or whatever. Not everything is about that. Not everything is about that. Sometimes, you know, the conversation is just about corruption or just about imperialism or just about the military-industrial complex. But again, he had nothing to say about any of those things. Just beyond pathetic. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.